Good evening from Seattle. A little bit later in the day than when I get on Facebook Live, but I do want to keep going with once a day, at least once a business day, to keep things rolling along. I was going to pick a new topic tonight, and I walked out to my bookcase for a resource that I wanted to look something up on, and realized that the resource in and of itself was something that I really should talk about because I think it's an excellent resource for you to have. And what it is it's a book by Rebecca Blood, and it's called the Weblog Handbook. And the Weblog Handbook was written by Rebecca Blood in 2002, which is a long time ago when you're talking about blogs. And blogs were called weblogs at that point in time. All it meant was you went on the web and you logged your activity as to where you went, with annotating the web, if you will. Back then we had things like Yahoo, which was a taxonomy of the web. Google had just started, but people thought it was a little bit crazy to use something called search and on something like Google. I mean, when I sold my company to LexisNexis in 2001, they wouldn't pay for search because they couldn't imagine why anybody would use search of archived content on the web. So that's how far back things were. But what happened was I ran into a blog while I was in my garage at night and had heard about a company doing blogs, and I didn't even know what they were called. It was TypePad, but I didn't know what they were called, blogs. It was a web-based publishing platform that I could share my ideas on how lawyers ought to use the internet to build a name and build a reputation and to get clients rather than by just putting up a website and hoping people would come. So I got on the ferry and I came over to Seattle, and I found two books on blogging, one by Biz Stone, which was one of the co-founders of Twitter, and another one by Rebecca Blood. And Rebecca Blood's was the one that really hit home to me. It just made sense in every which way. And I still, buy it for team members today. I don't know whether they all read it or not, but I really think it is the Bible on blogging now, almost 20 years later. And look at the things that she covers that are just every bit the same. What is a weblog or what is a blog? And it's not what everybody thinks it is. How do you name one? How do you get context as it relates to your blog? Why a weblog? Why a blog? Why do one if you're a writer? How do you build self-awareness? How do you build critical thinking? How do you build reputations? How do you build connected businesses? These are all things that she talks about that somebody that wants to do can do with a blog. And then she talks about, the tools. How do you name your blog? How do you go public? What platforms, should you be on? Think about these things. I get these questions all the time, and so does my team. How do you find your voice with your blog? And everybody struggles with this because they write things that sound like a Word document. Just sit down and key up summaries of cases or reports on the law. Everybody else is doing it, so I do it. There's no voice behind it. How do you find your voice? Rebecca Blood's book will talk about it. How do you do, where can you have to do no harm? Because some people get out there and go right up to the edge, or lawyers want to make sure that they're not doing any harm. There's a lot that you can talk about with your voice without doing any harm. What are your obvious strategies? How do you build an online presence? What are the online rules of the road? They're still very much today the same as they were in Rebecca's book. How do you build a community presence? Community presence so that you're inside the niche that you're practicing in, so that other people in the world, when they're doing research, see the people in that niche talking about those issues. How do you make connections? How do you make connections by blogging with the influencers in your area so that you're building your reputation, you're starting to get cited? How do you build your overall audience? How do you raise that audience? Everybody talks about click-throughs, but really it's the audience. How are you building a real audience that's interested in what you have to say? What do you avoid? What's the etiquette? What are the ethics? What are the credibility? What are the powers that you can use for good? May not just be, the other side of things, but what can you do for good through the use of a weblog? I really think this book is worth picking up because it just goes on and on. How do I create a schedule? The online reputation, all of these type of things. How do you use photos? How do you use webcams associated with your blog? When I read Rebecca Blood's book, The thing that turned me on at that time, that I knew that blogging was going to be big for lawyers, was when she talked about, if you were following a blog by a plumber and you were redoing a house and you followed it for insight and commentary on the things that you should be doing vis-a-vis plumbing in the house, whether you were hiring somebody else, what have you. Who would you call in the middle of the night when there was an inch of water in your kitchen? You'd call the person that wrote the blog if they're a local publisher. It's the same, and my heart beat. I had bought this book and one other book, because there were the only two books on blogging, because I wanted to get home on the ferry as soon as I could, because I knew blogs would be big. And the reason is that I called classmates and I in law school, we were plumbers. We billed by the hour. We weren't necessarily building things. We were billing by the hour. And all we were doing was billing at a higher rate than plumbers. So when I saw her say that a plumber would build a reputation by virtue of a blog and get more business by virtue of a blog, I go, well, my God, lawyers could do the same thing. They could do it, with a blog. So I hurried up and got home. And I also loved what Rebecca Blood wrote about, how long it would take to be a blogger. Because I was trying to be a better writer at that time. In between a covenant not to compete and starting in another company, one thing I wanted to do was be a better writer, because I got to be a little bit better in college. Law school kind of stunted me, and practicing law school certainly stunted me on being able to write in a way that could tell a story in a passionate way. I was writing legalese. Nothing wrong with that when courts are concerned, but the public would have a problem with that. And what Rebecca said, you could blog bad, but for only so long. And I realized that, I could then get on, not be intimidated by this thing, not be scared by it. I could be vulnerable. And after a while, I would blog okay. And blog okay to me meant connecting with people and engaging with people in a way that maybe there's something here. And ultimately it became starting a business based on blogs for lawyers. That was a big statement for her to make, for me, maybe not for everybody. And I still tell that to lawyers today when they'll say, well, how do I develop my style? What if I don't attract people and all those things? And I say, just blog. Just talk. A blog is the unedited voice of a person. You're not going to blog bad forever. You might blog bad in the beginning. That's why it doesn't matter what you write in your first blog post or your first two or your first three when nobody's paying attention to you anyway. Nobody even knows you exist. You'll get better in time. And the other thing that Rebecca Blood repeated was something that I read in another book, was to write in kindness. Write with the idea that you're writing in kindness to other people. So blogging, you will only be able to blog bad for so long, and write in kindness. So if you're going to pick up a book, do so. There aren't a lot of these running around. So you're going to have to get on Amazon. You're going to have to look up Rebecca Blood, who is the publisher of Rebecca's Pocket. But the name of the book is the Weblog Handbook. And I'd highly, highly recommend any lawyer, whether they've been blogging for 5 minutes or 5 years, to pick up a copy of it. Have a good evening.